It's a battle of early park dark rides today on Cine Park Rangers. We're going to be discussing Peter Pan's Flight versus E.T. Adventure. Now I want to set the stage here. I really love Peter Pan's Flight and E.T. Adventure both. They both are whimsical, sort of titular tentpole kind of rides for each park, in my opinion. A lot of that has to do with the fact that they use animatronics, they use a lot of charismatic elements within the ride itself to breathe life into it versus relying on 3D screen technology and whatever. Not that that's a bad thing, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but I think that this ride is just something, that these rides rather, are something special. You know, I think that they have that charm, that whimsy, and that thing about them that we all know and love about theme parks, and they do it to the highest caliber. That said, I think that there is one that's better than the other. And the one that's better than the other might surprise you. I'll save it until the end of the video. I'll give you my final thoughts on both of these rides. But why don't we begin by getting into a little bit of history? So when it comes to Peter Pan, Walt really wanted to make an animated feature about Peter Pan, which he had to sort of fight to acquire rights for. And eventually he did win this fight, and he bought them from Paramount in 1938. 15 years later, Walt debuted the film. It was met with critical rave reviews, you know, very typical for that time period with Disney animation. They were in that pocket of doing no wrong, essentially, when it comes to their filmmaking and animated features and everything that goes along with that. The film debuted February 5th, 1953. Well, in this span of time, they're obviously gearing up to open up Disneyland. And not only Disneyland, but Disney World as well. So Peter Pan's Flight would eventually open on October 3rd, 1971, 2 days after the Magic Kingdom officially opened. And since then, the ride has been duplicated in Tokyo Disneyland, Disneyland Paris, and Disneyland Shanghai. I think that Peter Pan is my favorite animated Disney film. And I think that it's also one of my favorite stories generally. I love the 2003 live action movie that they did back in the day. That movie's 21 years old now, which is insane. But I loved it. As a kid, I would dream about, actually, and this might be at risk of embarrassment to myself, I would dream about being the actor that gets to play Peter Pan and being in those wire harnesses. I remember watching the behind the scenes and seeing this kid attached to wires and flying all over this blue screen room and green screen room where he's, you know, being made out like he's flying, which is sick, right? Like, for a kid, that's something that you can literally only dream of. And you know, he's probably one of the few kids on planet Earth that got to do something like that. But it solidified this place in my brain where Peter Pan as a character and as a story just, for some reason, resonated with me. I think that there is something to the never growing up thing. I think there's something to banding with your brothers and finding camaraderie and, you know, maybe struggles that you've shared or things that you've gone through, those sorts of things. And I think that there's also a great grounding reality in the character of Wendy. And hey, it can't all just be fun and games. You know, there is real life to live still too, and it's worth living if you give it a chance. So I love Peter Pan. I have a Peter Pan tattoo on my chest. My wife has one on her thigh, and we got them shortly after we got married. It has both of them have our wedding dates on them. It's just one of those properties that has resonated to such a degree that, you know, it's sort of transcended my childhood, gone into my adulthood, and it's one of the things that my wife and I have bonded over in our dating life and as we've been married and whatnot. So all that to say, the Peter Pan ride was something that I was super excited to take her on for the first time on our honeymoon. We did Disney for our honeymoon, and she had never been before. Naturally, I'm really excited to take her on this ride, you know? And it had been a few years from the time that we went on our honeymoon from the last time that I had been to Disney, about 4 years, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't even remember if I did the Peter Pan ride that time in 2015 when we did that, or you know what? Yeah, whatever it was, it doesn't matter. I was just excited to take her on the ride. That was the thing that I was most excited about, right? So we go on the ride and we go through it, and it has the charm, you know? You get to go through Neverland, you get to go through a little bit of London, you get to, at the end, see, you know, Peter captaining the Jolly Roger and Hook with the crocodile and all the different things, right? It's just got that magic to it, you know? And I think that it's one of those deals that I just, it for some reason, it underwhelmed me a little bit. And I want to juxtapose that by saying that underwhelmed wasn't necessarily a bad thing in my particular case, right? Because I love Peter Pan. So regardless of how I actually feel about the ride, the fact that there is a ride that is centered around one of my favorite properties, that's going to do it for me all day long. You know what I mean? It's going to be one of those things that I'm going to forgive it a lot more just because it's something that I love. So I didn't realize this about Peter Pan's flight, though. The queue for this ride is truly something special. And I wish that they would do more in the actual ride. And I know why they don't. I know why they don't touch it, right? It's an old ride. It has a lot of old animatronics and, you know, sort of special effects and whatnot that have been maintained over the years, and they don't want to touch it. You know what I mean? They don't want to mess it up or ruin it somehow. And I think that I just really wanted to see more of what was in the queue represented in the ride itself. The queue is this super fun experience where you get to go through the Darling House. And it's a perfect setup for the ride, right? Because the ride takes you through the story. And the queue is what gets you to the story. So it's genius in that sense, right? The queue bit, and I've noticed this a lot more lately, and I'm curious to know what you guys think about this as well. The queues for Disney rides are often more entertaining and have better theming than the rides themselves, is what I'm getting at. I think that the Frozen ride is another one that's kind of like this for me, right? And with that, I think that maybe now is a good time to go ahead and switch gears to E.T. Adventure. Alright, so for the uninitiated, E.T. is a Steven Spielberg film that debuted in 1982, and it's a tentpole in Spielberg's career. It's beloved by many. Years later, it had a re-release in the early 2000s. I remember it well. I remember Toys R Us marketing for it. I remember having a little E.T. plushie, and I remember going to see it in theaters. And when Universal Studios opened in 1990, E.T. Adventure was one of the first rides that opened with it. That was June 7th of 1990. Other iterations of the same ride have opened at Universal Studios Hollywood and Universal Studios Japan shortly after the initial one opened. As it stands currently, E.T. Adventure is the last original ride at Universal Studios. It's one of those rides that it's kind of like lightning in a bottle these days. You know what I mean? You have this thing going on where Universal in particular is really trying to push boundaries and trying to push the technology forward, right? And they've always done this. Even like Shrek 4D back in the day was an example of this. So we have this ride where literally they're the same ride. So E.T. Adventure, instead of getting in a little pirate ship that takes you up and you're flying over the scenes and everything, E.T. Adventure puts you on the bike, E.T.'s at the front, and you're on a bike riding through everything. I think, for me personally, this ride has a lot more going on in the actual ride itself. I think it's a little bit longer, and it has just this raw kind of nostalgic factor that even the Peter Pan ride doesn't have, right? The nostalgia I'm talking about may just be the fact that I have a substantial love for anything to do with the 1980s, and clearly E.T. is a byproduct of that era. So maybe that's it for me. Maybe it's the fact that the animatronics are so goofy and a little bit nightmare-inducing. You know, there are definitely a few in there that are like, Okay, that was a choice that you guys made when you originally were crafting this thing. But I love that it sort of continues the story. I love that you get a little bit of interaction with Spielberg on the front end, and it's the same one. They haven't updated it, you know? It's got the like grain of an old like 90s, you know, VHS recording, and it's Spielberg talking to you, telling you E.T. needs your help to go back to his home world. And then you get back to his home world, and at the end of the ride, you know, they thank you literally by name, which is so fun, right? Like, well, what a fun detail. Now, the queue for E.T. is still very cool. It's not as cool as Peter Pan's Flight, though, but it is very cool. I think overall, though, the way that they scale everything on E.T. is a little more believable. It's a little more maybe one-to-one of how we would view things. You know, there are full-size people down below you, like, you know, they're mannequins, of course, or animatronics. But it's one of those things where when you're comparing the two, looking at the two, I have ridden E.T. most recently. I rode it in about this time in 2023, and we're gearing up to go to Disney for a trip in just 2 weeks from the time of recording this video, which is April 5th. So we're going to ride Peter Pan again soon, and maybe, you know, I'll give an update in the park vlog and let you know if my opinion has shifted any. I've ridden that ride enough to know that it probably will not. But I think that E.T. is the better ride of the two overall. And you know what? In fairness, it's about 30 years. No, I guess it's only about 20 years newer. But it's still 20 years newer, you know? Both rides are fantastic in their own right. And both deserve your time if you're in the parks, if you're in Universal Studios, or if you're in the Magic Kingdom. They both definitely deserve a spot in your lineup for the day. I love videos like this because it allows us to take a step back from the Disney craziness that's going on right now and focus in on things that are just in the parks currently, Universal and Disney alike. Universal's obviously gearing up for Epic Universe and all the stuff that's going on with Epic Universe and the craziness there. And then Disney's, you know, they're doing whatever they're doing. Maybe gearing up to shift some things around in Animal Kingdom. Who knows? You know, at the end of the day, what they're actually going to end up doing. There's so many things that happen with Disney over time and week in and week out that it's hard for me to keep up with this on this channel. This channel isn't really about news anyway. It's more about this. It's about the attractions themselves. It's about what is the overlap with film and with these rides. How do they interact? Is it a fun thing that they interact? Is it terrible that they interact? Should it be like it was in the old days where the theme parks created their own intellectual properties themselves? And maybe they get a movie spinoff from the ride, not from the movie, into a ride, I should say. But what do you guys think? Which is the better of the two rides? Is it Peter Pan's Flight? Is it E.T. Adventure? Do you like both about the same? Do you hate both of them? I want to hear from you guys. So drop a comment, leave a like, share the video, all the things. Really appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching.